The United Earth Defense Council chamber fell into darkness as the emergency broadcast override engaged. Councilor Elena Martinez's hand froze mid-gesture during her infrastructure proposal, her words dying in her throat as the massive holographic figure materialized in the center of the rotunda. Supreme Commander Vexthor's scaled face filled the space, his four eyes gleaming with barely contained contempt. Humans. His voice rumbled through the chamber like distant artillery fire. Your species has become a plague upon the galactic community. The Krethak general's upper mandibles clicked in what the council members recognized as their species' expression of disgust. You spread across the stars, hiding behind your machines, your automated warriors, your synthetic shields. Admiral James Chen shifted in his seat, his weathered face remaining carefully neutral as he studied the alien's body language. 20 years of diplomatic relations with the Krethak Empire had taught humanity much about their martial culture, but something about this transmission felt different. More personal, more dangerous. For 3 stellar cycles, we have watched you claim worlds through your cowardly tactics. Vexthor continued, his scales darkening to deep crimson, a sign of aggressive intent. You send drones to fight your battles. You deploy artificial intelligences to wage your wars. You orchestrate victories from thousands of light years away, never risking your own blood. The chamber's environmental systems hummed softly as they compensated for the sudden tension-induced heat spike from its occupants. General Sarah Williams, commander of Earth's Special Operations Division, quietly activated her neural interface, sending a priority alert to her rapid response teams. Just in case, the Krethak Empire will tolerate this dishonor no longer. Vexthor's massive holographic hand swept through the air, projecting a stellar map that highlighted a contested system near the border of both their territories. We challenge humanity to face us in honorable combat on the surface of New Thessaly. No machines, no artificial warriors, no remote weapons. A murmur rippled through the council chamber. New Thessaly, with its vast mineral deposits and strategic position, had been a point of diplomatic tension for months. Both species had colonial interests there, but neither had pushed for military action. Until now. Match our numbers, Vexthor declared, and we shall see who truly deserves the stars. 10,000 warriors for 10,000. 1,000,000 for 1,000,000. Choose your army's size, humans, and we shall meet it precisely. His mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his kind, though it displayed rows of serrated teeth. Unless, of course, you prefer to cower behind your technology, proving to all species that humanity's place is in the dirt, not among the stars. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. The normal lights gradually returned, illuminating faces that ranged from outrage to calculation to genuine concern. Admiral Chen was the first to speak. They're exploiting our public image problem. His voice carried the weight of experience. 3 different species have already filed formal complaints about our automated defense systems in the Galactic Assembly. It's a trap, General Williams stated flatly, her cybernetic eye whirring as it analyzed the recorded transmission. The Krethak never issue challenges they aren't certain they can win. They found a way to neutralize our technological advantage, and they're baiting us into revealing our tactical capabilities. Councilor Martinez leaned forward, her dark eyes narrowing. But we can't ignore this. The diplomatic fallout would be nothing compared to the bloodbath they're planning. Williams interrupted. She gestured, and her neural interface projected casualty estimates that made several council members blanch. The Krethak don't just fight wars. They engineer massacres disguised as honorable combat. Whatever force we send, they'll have a countermeasure prepared. The chamber erupted into heated debate. Suggestions flew, sending minimal forces as a protest, requesting Galactic Assembly meditation, even considering a full military response with their most advanced weapons, challenge be damned. Only Defense Minister Robert Cooper remained silent, studying the space where Vexthor's hologram had been. A peculiar smile played at the corners of his mouth. The same smile that had preceded some of humanity's most unconventional military victories. Minister Cooper. Admiral Chen noticed his expression. You have an idea. Cooper's smile widened slightly. Oh yes. He tapped his console, pulling up a classified personnel file. I believe it's time we showed the Krathak why humanity's greatest weapon has never been our technology. He paused for effect. Let me tell you about Major Jack Reynolds. For 3 days, the galaxy held its breath. Trade routes fell silent as merchant ships hugged safe harbors, waiting to see if war would engulf the spiral arm. The Galactic Assembly convened emergency sessions, preparing for what many assumed would be humanity's declaration of full-scale war against the Krethak Empire. In the war room beneath Geneva, Defense Minister Cooper sat alone, reviewing Major Reynolds' file for the 13th time. The holographic displays cast a soft blue glow across his face as he studied mission reports that would never see the light of day. Behind him, the door whispered open. The Council has approved your proposal, Admiral Chen announced, his voice carrying equal parts disbelief and admiration. Though I'm still not convinced, this isn't mass suicide. Cooper smiled without looking up. That's exactly what they said before Proxima 7. Proxima 7 was different. We had advantages they didn't know about. We still do. Cooper finally turned, gesturing to the chair across from him. Tell me, James, what's the one thing the Krathak value more than victory? Honor, Chen replied immediately, settling into the seat. Their entire society is built around warrior traditions and combat glory. Exactly. And what happens when those traditions conflict with each other? Before Chen could answer, General Williams strode in, her cybernetic eye glowing faintly in the dim light. The response package is ready for transmission. Though I still think we should at least send a backup team to orbit. Cooper shook his head. No, it has to be exactly as we discussed. One soldier. No support. No hidden advantages. The Krathak will be watching for any hint of deception. They'll be watching for deception because that's what they're planning, Williams countered. Our deep space sensors have detected unusual activity in 3 systems adjacent to New Thessaly. They're positioning forces. Of course they are. Cooper's smile widened. They're preparing for every scenario except the one we're giving them. The massive display wall flickered to life, showing the waiting Krathak command ship in orbit around New Thessaly. Supreme Commander Vex Thor's forces had arrived early, making a show of their military might. 15 capital ships arranged in perfect formation, their ancient hull designs resembling the blade ships of their ancestors. Send it, Cooper ordered. General Williams pressed her palm to the authentication panel. The transmission was brief, just 23 words. They watched as it streaked across space at light speed, carrying humanity's response to the Krathak challenge. In the flagship's command center, Supreme Commander Vex Thor's scales rippled with anticipation as the human transmission arrived. His subordinates gathered around, mandibles clicking with eagerness to learn what size force they would face. The message appeared on their main display. The United Earth Defense Council accepts your terms for honorable combat on New Thessaly. We will send 1 soldier. Choose your champion wisely. Silence held for 3 heartbeats before the command center erupted in laughter. Vex Thor's own mandibles clicked rapidly, their equivalent of mocking chuckles, but his second set of eyes remained fixed on the message. Something about its simplicity disturbed him. They'd mock us, his second-in-command growled. They treat our sacred challenge as a joke. No, Vex Thor's voice cut through the laughter. This is something else. He had studied humans for years, learned their patterns of deception and strategy. This didn't fit any of them. Show me the transmission analysis. The data confirmed his unease. No hidden signals. No encrypted fragments. No signs of ships moving into position behind the cover of nearby nebulae. Just 23 words, sent in the clear. They're planning something, he muttered. Prepare the sacred combat grounds according to the ancient laws. Triple the scanning protocols. And bring me everything we have on their current military leadership. As his subordinates rushed to comply, Vex Thor replayed the message again. In his 4 decades of military service, he had learned to trust his instincts. Right now, they were screaming that he had made a terrible mistake. Back on Earth, Cooper closed Major Reynolds' file and stood. "The game is set," he announced. "Now we show them why humanity's greatest weapon has never been our technology or our numbers." "What is our greatest weapon?" Williams asked. Cooper's eyes gleamed. "Our ability to make the enemy defeat themselves." The media circus outside Vandenberg Spaceport reached fever pitch as the unmarked shuttle descended through the morning fog. Reporters from every major news network jostled for position, their hover cameras darting through the air like anxious insects. The headline, "Earth's Champion" or "Earth's Doom," scrolled across virtual billboards in a dozen languages. "Look at them," General Williams muttered, watching the crowd from the private observation deck. "They're expecting some kind of superhuman giant." She turned to Cooper. "You haven't even told me why you chose him." The defense minister's eyes remained fixed on the approaching shuttle. "Did you ever hear about the Omicron incident? The Deep Space Research Station. It was destroyed in a reactor malfunction 3 years ago." "That's the official story." Cooper handed her a sealed data crystal. "The truth is, we had a first contact situation go badly wrong. Very badly wrong. Reynolds was on site, conducting what was supposed to be a routine security assessment. The shuttle's landing thrusters kicked up swirls of fog as it touched down. Williams inserted the crystal into her neural interface, and her cybernetic eye widened as the classified footage began to play. He was alone in the station for 36 hours with a psychic predator species that had already killed half the science team. Cooper continued. "When our rescue team arrived, they found Reynolds in the mess hall, sharing a meal with the alien delegation and discussing philosophy. The shuttle's hatch opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Major Jack Reynolds stepped out, carrying a standard-issue duffel bag over one shoulder. He stood at an unremarkable 5'10", his build athletic, but not imposing. His brown hair was cut to regulation length, his face clean-shaven. He could have walked through any crowd on Earth without drawing a second glance. The assembled media fell into confused silence. Reynolds ignored the cameras and walked directly to the military reception area, offering a crisp salute to his superior officers. "Major Jack Reynolds, reporting as ordered, sir." "At ease, Major." Cooper gestured to the secure elevator. "I trust your flight was comfortable." "Spent it studying Krathak cultural archives, sir. Their early tribal periods are fascinating." Reynolds fell into step beside them as they entered the elevator. "Did you know their concept of honor evolved from survival strategies during their planet's ice age?" Williams stared at him. This was the man they were sending to face a Krathak warrior. He sounded more like a professor than a soldier. The elevator descended to the secure briefing level, where the full Joint Chiefs waited. Admiral Chen stood as they entered. "Major Reynolds, the Council has questions about your proposed approach to this challenge." Reynolds set his duffel bag down and pulled out a worn paper notebook, an archaic choice that raised eyebrows around the room. "With respect, Admiral, I have a question first." He opened the notebook, revealing pages dense with handwritten notes. "In the original transmission, did Supreme Commander Vexthor specifically prohibit the use of their own cultural weapons against them?" A puzzled silence fell over the room. "Cultural weapons." General Williams frowned. "The Krathak have 27 different sacred combat traditions that can be invoked to modify or even cancel a challenge," Reynolds explained, flipping through his notes. "Each one evolved from specific survival situations in their history. Their warriors are required to honor these traditions, even if doing so means certain defeat." Cooper's smile grew as understanding dawned on the faces around the room. "You're not planning to fight them at all, are you?" Williams asked. "Oh, I'm planning to fight." Reynolds looked up, and for the first time, they saw the steel behind his scholarly demeanor. "I'm just going to do it in a way they've never seen a human fight before. Their entire strategy depends on us either sending an army they can crush or a champion they can defeat in traditional combat. They've prepared for every scenario except one." "Which is?" Admiral Chen leaned forward. A warrior who understands their culture better than they do. Reynolds closed his notebook. They expect us to either break their rules or follow them blindly. Instead, I'm going to use their own sacred laws to change the entire game. His eyes held a quiet confidence that made even Williams reassess her doubts. By the time they realize what I'm doing, it will be too late to stop it. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were sending a scholar to fight a warrior culture. And somehow, that made perfect sense. The xenological archives beneath Mount Weather hummed with ancient knowledge. Holographic displays cast dancing shadows across the curved walls as Major Reynolds sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by floating images of Krathak artifacts and text fragments. His paper notebook lay open beside him, its pages filling with his precise handwriting. "You're running out of time," General Williams announced from the doorway. "The transport leaves in 12 hours. Reynolds didn't look up. "Did you know the Krathak have a ritual specifically for combat in sandstorms? It's called the Veiled Warrior's Path. Fascinating implications about their evolutionary history." Williams stepped carefully through the holographic displays. "The Krathak champion will snap you in half while you're pondering their evolutionary history." "Their champion." Reynolds finally looked up, his eyes bright with discovery. "Tell me, General, how did they choose him? What ritual did they use?" "Our intelligence suggests they selected their strongest warrior. Kralvor, undefeated in 17 ritual combats." Reynolds smiled and made another note. "Exactly. They chose by physical combat prowess. But according to their own sacred texts, a champion for an interspecies challenge must be chosen through the rite of 7 virtues." He tapped his notebook. "Their own laws invalidate their champion selection." Williams stared at him. "You're going to challenge their champion's right to fight?" "No." Reynolds stood, stretching after hours of study. "I'm going to give them exactly what they expect, right up until the moment I don't." He walked to a particular display, expanding an image of an ancient Krathak temple. Everything they know about humans tells them we'll either try to outsmart them or overpower them. So they've prepared for both. He gestured, and the archives AI brought up meteorological data for New Thessaly. What they don't expect is for us to understand their culture better than they do. 3 centuries of warfare made them forget their own survival traditions, but those traditions are still sacred law. The holographic displays shifted, showing overlapping patterns of Krathak military history, weather systems, and cultural evolution. William's cybernetic eye whirred as it tried to process the connections. "Look here." Reynolds pointed to a particular text fragment. "The Krathak developed their honor code during an ice age that nearly wiped them out. Every one of their combat traditions has a survival component that most of their modern warriors have forgotten." A soft chime indicated another visitor. Admiral Chen entered, carrying a secure datapad. "The Krathak champion has begun his ritual preparations. Very public, very dramatic. Our analysts say it's psychological warfare." Reynolds nodded, unsurprised. "Of course, they're playing to their strengths: physical intimidation, martial prowess, ceremonial dominance." He turned to another display, this one showing topographical maps of New Thessaly. "While they focus on the combat they expect, I'm preparing for the battle they've forgotten." "Which is?" Williams crossed her arms. "Survival." Reynolds enlarged a section of the map. "New Thessaly's mountain ranges make Earth's Himalayas look gentle. Extreme temperature variations, unpredictable storm systems, indigenous predators that evolved in a higher gravity environment." His finger traced a particular path through the mountains. "The perfect place to invoke the rite of Kivathmar." Chen frowned. "I don't know that one." "Neither will they, at first." Reynolds smiled. "It's their oldest combat tradition, created when their ancestors had to prove themselves worthy of leading hunting parties through deadly terrain. A test of not just strength, but wisdom. Not just combat skill, but survival knowledge." He turned to face his superior officers, his expression serious. The Krothak think they're setting up a simple duel, but their own sacred laws give any challenged warrior the right to choose the form of combat that best serves honor. They've forgotten that honor, to their ancestors, meant keeping their people alive through impossible conditions. William's cybernetic eye finally found the pattern in Reynolds' research. You're not preparing for a fight. You're preparing for an expedition. I'm preparing to remind them what their honor code really means. Reynolds closed his notebook. They call us cowards for using technology to survive. I'm going to show them what one human can do with nothing but knowledge and determination. He paused, looking at the mountain ranges again. And when it's over, they'll understand that true strength isn't about winning fights. It's about surviving them. New Thessaly's crimson sun painted the ceremonial grounds in shades of blood. The gathered Krothak warriors stood in perfect formation, their scaled armor catching the light like thousands of polished rubies. On the opposite side of the field, a small delegation of human officials watched in stern silence. Supreme Commander Vexthor's voice boomed across the ancient arena. Let the champions present themselves before honor and history. From the Krothak side, a massive gate crafted from local stone ground open. Kralvor, their chosen champion, emerged to thunderous roars from his species. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his ceremonial battle armor adorned with the bone fragments of worthy opponents. Each piece told a story of victory, and together they created an epic of undefeated combat prowess. I am Kralvor. His voice resonated across the grounds, amplified by tradition and technology. 17 times I have entered sacred combat. 17 times I have claimed victory through strength and honor. He raised his arms, and light glinted off the razor-sharp battle claws extending from his gauntlets. Today, I shall prove humanity's weakness before all species. The Krothak warriors beat their chest plates in rhythm, the sound like approaching thunder. Vexthor's scales darkened with pride as he watched his champion command the ceremony. From the human side, a simple door slid open. Major Jack Reynolds walked out alone, wearing standard-issue combat fatigues and boots. He carried a small pack over one shoulder, its contents unknown but clearly minimal. The contrast between him and his opponent couldn't have been more stark. Where Kralvor was a monument to martial glory, Reynolds looked like he was going for a hike. The Krothak's rhythmic beating faltered, then resumed with an edge of mockery. Reynolds stopped at his designated position, set his pack down carefully, and stretched his shoulders as if preparing for a morning workout. His casual demeanor caused confused murmurs among the alien spectators. Human, Kralvor's voice dripped with disdain. Where is your ceremonial armor? Where are the marks of your victories? Reynolds smiled pleasantly. Good morning. Beautiful sunrise, isn't it? The way it catches those mountain peaks reminds me of Mars during dust season. He spoke in perfect Krothak, his pronunciation carrying the formal tones of their ancient dialect. Confusion rippled through the alien ranks. This wasn't the response their psychological warfare should have provoked. Vexthor stepped forward, his secondary eyes narrowing. You mock our sacred combat with this casualness. Not at all. Supreme Commander. Reynolds bowed with precise formality, executing the exact gesture of respect their traditions demanded. I honor this combat so deeply that I've spent weeks studying your most ancient and sacred traditions. Fascinating reading. Something in his tone made Vexthor's scales ripple with unease. Kralvor growled, the sound amplified by his armor's resonators. Enough talk. Take your combat position, so I may end this quickly. Reynolds checked his watch instead. Actually, according to the third scroll of Kivath, we have exactly 7 minutes before combat can legally begin. Would you like to discuss the weather patterns in the Devil's Spine range? I've noticed some fascinating high-altitude pressure systems forming. The casual mention of their sacred texts in the same breath as weather reports caused more confusion. Kralvor's mighty stance faltered slightly as he tried to process this unexpected approach. A human observer leaned toward General Williams. What is he doing? Williams watched Reynolds through her cybernetic eye, noting his perfectly relaxed posture and the calculated precision of his movements. He's fighting already. They just don't know it yet. As if to prove her point, Reynolds pulled a small notebook from his pack and began. The words "Right of Kivoth Nar" hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Supreme Commander Vexthor's scales shifted from aggressive crimson to uncertain amber. Behind him, ancient scholars hurriedly consulted data crystals, searching for references to this nearly forgotten tradition. You dare invoke ancient rites you cannot understand. Kralvor's voice boomed across the ceremonial grounds, but there was a new edge to it: uncertainty. Reynolds opened his worn notebook with deliberate calm. "The rite of Kivoth Nar," he began, his perfect classical Krathak making the elderly scholars lift their heads in surprise, was established during the Great Ice Storm of the Third Dynasty. When 2,000 warriors were trapped in the Crystal Mountains, their leaders realized that victory in combat meant nothing if their people died in the process. He turned a page, the soft sound somehow carrying across the now silent arena. According to the sacred scrolls, any warrior may invoke this rite to transform a battle of arms into a test of true warrior spirit, the ability to keep oneself and others alive against impossible odds. Vexthor stepped forward, his secondary eyes fixed on Reynolds. "These are children's tales, ancient history that has no bearing on modern combat." "Really?" Reynolds smiled. "Then you won't mind if I quote the 7th Scroll of Combat Ethics, paragraph 3. No warrior may deny the ancient rites, for they are the foundation upon which all honor stands. To reject them is to reject honor itself." A murmur ran through the Krathak ranks. The human had quoted their most sacred text word for perfect word. "The law is clear," Reynolds continued, his voice carrying the formal tones of challenge. "I invoke the right to modify our combat according to the oldest traditions of your people. Unless, of course, the Krathak Empire wishes to be known as oathbreakers who abandon their own sacred laws when faced with unexpected challenges." Vexthor's scales rippled with barely contained rage and fear. The human had backed them into a corner using their own traditions. To refuse would destroy their honor before the gathered representatives of a dozen species. To accept would mean fighting on terms they hadn't prepared for. "State your terms," Vexthor growled. Reynolds gestured to the towering mountain range visible on the horizon. "The infamous Devil's Spine. Your champion and I will be transported to opposite ends of the range. No weapons, no armor, no support systems. We will each have to cross the mountains to reach the Temple of Warriors at the center. The first to arrive wins the planet for their species." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "But here's the crucial part from your ancient laws. We must document not just our survival, but our adherence to the warrior's code of protecting life. Every being we encounter, help, or save along the way becomes part of our honor testimony." Kralvor stepped forward, his massive form looming over Reynolds. "You would turn sacred combat into a survival game." The transport vessel's engines whined as it touched down on the northern edge of the Devil's Spine mountain range. Major Reynolds stepped out into the biting wind, his breath visible in the thin air. Behind him, the Krathak observer performed one final scan to ensure he carried no hidden technology or weapons. "Conditions at drop point," the observer announced through his communicator. "Temperature, -15 degrees Celsius. Wind speed, 40 knots. Atmospheric pressure, 60% of standard." The human appears. He paused, mandibles clicking in confusion. The human appears to be smiling. Reynolds was indeed smiling as he surveyed the jagged peaks before him. While the observer rattled off the harsh conditions, he was already noting the lichen patterns on the rocks, the way certain snowdrifts curved, the subtle signs that would guide his journey. "You understand that survival is considered unlikely." The observer clicked his mandibles again. "Our own geological surveys mark these mountains as a death zone." "Did you know," Reynolds replied, adjusting his pack straps, "that the first Krathak explorers used to navigate by reading crystalline formations in the rocks? The magnetic properties aligned with natural pathways through dangerous terrain. He pointed to a seemingly random pattern in the nearest cliff face. Like that one. The observer stared at him. How could you possibly know? Your ancestors wrote everything down. Reynolds checked his bootlaces one last time. Sometimes the most valuable survival tools are buried in cultural archives rather than tactical databases. 500 kilometers to the south, Kralvor was being dropped at his starting point. The massive warrior carried nothing but the environmental suit all Krathak required for high-altitude survival. Their scaled bodies weren't designed for extreme cold. As both warriors began their journey, observation drones maintained a discreet distance, broadcasting the challenge to billions across the galaxy. The Krathak expected a quick resolution. Surely the human would succumb to the elements within days. They were wrong. By sunset of the first day, Reynolds had already covered 20 kilometers, moving with deliberate efficiency through terrain that should have been impassable. He found natural shelters where wind patterns had carved caves, identified edible fungi that most survivors would miss, and used geological features to navigate that even the observation drones couldn't properly map. Impossible, Vexthor muttered, watching the feeds from the command center. He's reading the landscape like a Krathak scoutmaster. The human's path seemed random to untrained eyes, but the ancient scholars in the command center began to notice patterns. Reynolds wasn't just surviving. He was following trails laid down by their ancestors, paths recorded in texts so old most modern Krathak had forgotten them. On the third day, Reynolds encountered his first major challenge. A massive storm system rolled through the mountains, driving temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius. The observation drones could barely maintain visual contact through the swirling snow. But instead of seeking shelter, Reynolds pressed forward. He had read the weather patterns in the crystal formations, just as ancient Krathak hunters once did. The storm's updrafts actually made certain passages easier to navigate if you understood how to use them. Meanwhile, Kralvor struggled against the mountain's raw power. His superior strength meant nothing against wind that could tear boulders from cliffs. His combat training offered no advantage against avalanches and ice storms. When his environmental suit malfunctioned on the fourth day, he was forced to backtrack 10 kilometers to find shelter. The human planned this, one of the scholars announced, reviewing Reynolds' path. Every step, every rest point, every deviation. He's following the ancient survival routes. He's not just crossing the mountains, he's demonstrating mastery of our oldest wilderness teachings. The observation feeds caught Reynolds stopping to help injured mountain creatures, marking dangerous crevices for those who might follow, and even leaving carefully preserved food caches at traditional shelter points, all behaviors described in the oldest Krathak texts about honorable survival. This is what he meant. Vexthor realized, his scales shifting to the deep blue of revelation. He's not trying to prove he's stronger than us. He's proving that humans understand survival itself better than we do. As the first week drew to a close, the galaxy watched in amazement as the true nature of Reynolds' victory began to take shape. It wasn't just about reaching the temple first. It was about showing that true strength lay in understanding and adapting to challenges rather than trying to overpower them. The battle for New Thessaly had become something far more profound. A lesson about the real meaning of warrior wisdom, taught by a human who had bothered to learn what the Krathak themselves had forgotten. The ancient temple of warriors rose from the mountain's heart like a crystal spear piercing the sky. As dawn broke on the 30th day, Major Reynolds stood at the base of its 1,000 steps, his beard frosted with ice, but his eyes clear and alert. He had arrived 4 days ahead of Kralvor, but reaching the temple first was only part of his victory. "Approach, human warrior," the temple guardian intoned, his ceremonial armor glinting in the early light. "Present your journey's testimony." Reynolds unshouldered his pack and retrieved his notebook. The pages were filled with more than just observations. They told a story of survival and honor that would reshape Krathak understanding of both. "My first testimony," he began in classical Krathak, "is the rescue of a juvenile snow hunter. He produced detailed sketches of how he had splinted the creature's leg using techniques described in ancient Krathak medical texts. The Second Dynasty scrolls speak of a warrior's duty to preserve life, not just in battle, but in all moments. The gathered observers, both present and watching through broadcasts, remained silent as Reynolds continued through his documentation. He had marked safe passages through treacherous terrain, left supplies at traditional waypoints, and even managed to warn a group of mountain researchers about an approaching storm using only natural signs. Supreme Commander Vex Thor arrived via transport as Reynolds reached his final testimony. The human's voice carried across the temple grounds. And on the 26th day, I found tracks in the snow leading to a crevasse. Krathak tracks. A murmur ran through the crowd. Reynolds produced images drawn in his notebook, a perfect map of how he had located Kralvor's hunting party after their environmental systems failed. He had left them supplies, medical aid, and detailed instructions for reaching safety, all without ever being seen. The ancient texts say that true victory comes not from defeating an enemy, but from turning them into an ally through wisdom and honor, Reynolds quoted. I chose not to reveal myself because this wasn't about proving human superiority. It was about demonstrating that the principles your ancestors lived by are still valid. Kralvor himself arrived as Reynolds finished speaking. The massive warrior had survived, but the mountains had humbled him. He looked at his human opponent with new understanding. I am defeated, Kralvor announced, his voice carrying the formal tones of ritual submission. Not by combat, but by wisdom. The human warrior has shown mastery of our most sacred traditions I had forgotten in my pursuit of martial glory. Vex Thor stepped forward, his scales shifting through colors that indicated deep emotional conflict. You could have left them to die in that crevasse. Your victory would have been assured. No, Reynolds replied simply. It wouldn't have been victory at all. Your ancestors understood that survival isn't a zero-sum game. Out here, in the real challenges that shape civilizations, we either learn to help each other survive, or we all lose eventually. He turned to address not just the gathered Krathak, but the billions watching across the galaxy. Humanity doesn't use technology because we're afraid to fight. We use it because we learned, through centuries of hard lessons, that the greatest victory is finding ways to survive without fighting at all. The temple guardian raised his ceremonial staff. The challenge is complete. Through wisdom, honor, and adherence to the ancient ways, the human warrior has claimed this world for his people. But Reynolds shook his head. No, I claim something more important. He pulled one final document from his pack, a proposal for a joint human Krathak research station on New Thessaly, dedicated to studying and preserving the survival wisdom of both species. Your ancient laws say that when a warrior demonstrates true wisdom, they earn the right to choose their prize, he continued. I choose partnership over possession. Let New Thessaly become a place where both our species can learn from each other's strengths. As the sun rose fully over the temple, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, Vex Thor did something no human had ever seen. He bowed deeply to Reynolds, displaying all four eyes in a gesture of absolute respect. You came to teach us about survival, the Supreme Commander said. But you have taught us something far more valuable. That true strength lies not in the weapons we carry, but in the wisdom we choose to preserve. The galaxy watched as human and Krathak stood together on those ancient steps, marking the moment when a challenge of combat became a triumph of understanding. Reynolds had won more than a battle or a planet. He had won a future where wisdom and cooperation might finally take precedence over force and fear.